Well, welcome everyone. Hello everyone, welcome to this inspiring forum with fantastic speakers, Palestine, the moral issue of our time. And welcome to Ecosocialism, Not Barbarism 2025. My name's Rachel and I'll be chairing this session. And if people are coming to the conference for their first session, the toilets are just down there. And this conference is organised by Green Left and Socialist Alliance. And if you're inspired by the conference and want to find out more, get involved in socialist politics, can either join or stay in touch or find out more information at the desk at the front. And after the speakers are finished, I'll pass around a contact sheet. And we encourage comrades and friends to go and ask any question at all to those sitting on the desk near the registration table. So we acknowledge that we are meeting on the Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation, and this land was never ceded. It was taken by force. The struggle for First Nations sovereignty is deeply connected with the struggles against racism, imperialism and capitalism. And as socialists, we pledge to actively fight for decolonisation and against all the manifestations of that, such as children being stolen from their parents and communities, the poverty gap, the deaths in custody. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Well, today we're going to hear from Hanieh, who's a Professor of Political Economy and Global Development at the University of Exeter and a Distinguished Research Fellow at the Institute of International and Area Studies at Tsinghua University, Beijing, China. Hanieh is of Palestinian origin and from 1997 to 2003 lived in Palestine, where he completed an MA in Regional Studies at Al-Quds University in Jerusalem. Hanieh's research has examined the dynamics of class and state formation in the 6 oil-rich Gulf Arab monarchs and the profound impact that Gulf capitalism has had on socio-economic and political developments in the wider Middle East. Hanieh has recently published Resisting Erasure, Capital, Imperialism and Race in Palestine, co-authored with Robert Knox and Raif Zaider, and Crude Capitalism, Oil, Corporate Wealth and the Making of the World Market. We will then hear from Amin G. Abbas, who is the son and grandson of Palestinian refugees from Jenin in Tiberias. He's an organiser with the Free Palestine Melbourne, Melbourne for Palestine and Palestinian National Day teams. He is also an executive board member with Australian Palestine Advocacy Network and a Dubka performer and teacher with Jafra Dubka. He dreams of returning to a free Palestine. And then we will hear from Janet Parker, who is a long-time international solidarity and refugee rights campaigner, a founding member of Jews for Palestine WA and a member of Socialist Alliance. So give it up for Adam Hanieh.
Hi, comrades. Thank you. You can hear me okay? Yeah. Great. Thanks very much for that warm welcome, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you in person, but I hope the Ecosocialism is going well and comrades are doing well in these difficult times. I wanted to, in my comments today, cover a few issues around the questions of imperialism and the situation of the climate crisis today, but link this very much to what is going on in Palestine, in particular the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Obviously, this meeting is occurring at a moment of which is the genocide in Gaza. But in addition to that, we have the clear manifestations of the climate crisis and the several recent wars, notably, of course, the attack on Iran a few months ago. But I wanted to begin with some comments on the situation facing Palestinian people in Gaza and how I think it connects to the struggle for eco-socialism. Over the last now 2 years, the genocide in Gaza has become a lightning rod or leading edge of a deep-seated global political radicalization. And I mean this on both the left and the right. We're seeing the total destruction of a trapped population, daily bombardment, famine, the complete destruction of universities, schools, electricity, and sanitation. And we see this genocide now for 2 years broadcast 24/7. And remember, we are seeing the sanitized version. The reality is much, much worse. And the barbarity of this has rightly moved so many people around the world into political action, disrupting political and politics, the normality of politics everywhere. We've seen the huge demonstrations, I know in Australia, but in the UK and the US. We've seen the courageous actions of dock workers around the world. We've seen the attempts of people to break the siege on the flotillas recently. And of course, we've seen the ongoing building and support for the BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. At the same time, we've seen the unstinting support of Western powers, especially the US, but also the UK and other European powers and Australia, in supporting and facilitating this violence, this ongoing genocide, arming, politically legitimizing, and financially aiding the genocide in total culpability. But I think within this broad radicalization, there are some problems in how Palestine is typically framed and thought about in everyday consciousness, including those of us on the left. What I mean by this is that I think Palestine is often exceptionalized, viewed simply through the lens of what is going on in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, or in the Israeli political establishment, rather than situating the question of Palestine in the bigger regional dynamics of the Middle East. Very often, the question of solidarity is reduced simply to the question of Israel's massive human rights abuses and the ongoing violations of international law, the killings, the arrests, the dispossession that we've known now for nearly 8 decades. And I think the problem with this way of looking at Palestine through this human rights lens, through this international law lens, is that it depoliticizes the Palestinian struggle, and it fails to explain why Western states continue to support Israel so unequivocally. And when this question of Western support, in particular the US support of Israel, is raised, many point to a pro-Israel lobby operating in North America and Western Europe as the cause. And I want to argue tonight that I think this lobby argument is a false and politically dangerous viewpoint that gets the relationships between Western states and Israel fundamentally wrong. And I want to state clearly that we need to break with these kinds of framings and instead place Palestine in the global context in which Israeli settler colonialism operates and has operated for now nearly 80 years, and the particular conjuncture of global capitalism that we are currently living in. And here I think is the immense relevance to the question of Palestine, to the struggle for eco-socialism, and I think many of the themes that you were discussing at the conference today. So let me run through some of these arguments in a bit more detail. The first thing is I think we need to situate Israeli settler colonialism and the dispossession of Palestinians since 1947, 1948 in the Middle East's crucial place in how our oil-centered world emerged from the mid-20th century onwards. A lot of discussion ignores this regional scale in attempting to explain the 100-year war against Palestinians. Around the time of the Second World War, or just shortly after the Second World War, the Middle East became a key crucible of global politics because of two major transitions that occurred at this time. The first of these transitions was the shift to oil as the leading fossil fuel, supplanting coal and really leading to what's being called by eco-socialists as the great acceleration, the moment that we're living today where the human impact on the biosphere and our ecologies because of the fossil fuel and this oil to coal transition has really accelerated exponentially since that time of the mid-20th century. So that's the first transition, the transition to oil as the leading fossil fuel. Obviously, I'm not saying here that coal is no longer being used. In fact, coal the use of coal has accelerated alongside oil, but as with all energy transitions under capitalism, this is an additive process where oil was added to coal in this fossil fuel substrate that we live the consequences of today. So the second transition that occurred at the same time as this oil to coal transition was the rise of the United States as the dominant capitalist state, displacing older European colonial powers, in particular Britain and France. And the Middle East was key to both of these transitions, and this, I think, really is perhaps the most important thing I want to say, in my opinion, today. Understanding these two transitions, the oil to coal and the rise of the United States as the dominant power, and the very important place of the Middle East in enabling and facilitating these two interlinked transitions to take place. Because at the time, and still today, the major site of the world's oil supplies outside of the United States and the Soviet Union were located in the Middle East, in particular in the Gulf monarchies of Saudi Arabia and the other monarchies along the Arabian Peninsula. Because of the Middle East's important role in facilitating this transition, it enabled this transition to take place, the fossil fuel transition to take place in Western Europe and later in the rest of the world. And in this context, what happened in the Middle East at this time was, with the breakdown of European colonial rule, the US emerged as the dominant foreign power in the region through building alliances, in particular at this moment of the post-Second World War, in particular with Saudi Arabia as the leading oil producer at the time and leading oil exporter today. Of course, this is a moment in the Middle East of anti-colonial national liberation movements in Egypt and elsewhere, and the US doubles down on the region, backing and ensuring the survival of Saudi Arabia, and this Saudi-US alliance remains a key pillar of American global power today. The second key pillar of a US power in the region, of course, was Israel. Particularly after the 1967 war, in which Israel destroyed the armed forces and political legitimacy of Egypt and the Nasserist anti-colonial movements in Egypt and elsewhere in the region. Egypt was at that time the center of Arab nationalist struggles. And from 1967 onwards, Israel became the core American ally in the region, backed by billions in military and financial subsidies, and even more importantly, as we see today, political backing. Blocking, of course, any censure, US playing the role of blocking any censure of Israel on the world stage. Now, why did Israel play this particular role within the architecture of American power in the region and more globally? This was fundamentally connected to Israel's character as a settler colonial state, a state based on the dispossession of the Palestinian population. Settler colonies, as you know only too well in the Australian context, are societies that must always fortify structures of racial oppression, class exploitation, and dispossession of the indigenous populations. They are typically highly racist, violent societies, and in the case of Israel, highly militarized, which tend to be reliant upon external support to maintain imperial privileges in a hostile regional environment. And this is precisely the role that Israel came to play for the United States in this second half of the 20th century. And in this way, settler colonies tend to be much more dependable partners of Western imperial interests than normal client states. In the Middle East, we can speak to Egypt and Jordan today, both of which remain important allies of the United States, but those states must always continue to respond and to mass pressure from below, from the struggles of their own populations. They always face the potential for revolutions and rebellions, as we saw in 2011. This is a situation that doesn't exist in the same kind of way in the case of Israel as a settler colony. And this is why Britain supported Zionism as a political movement in the early 20th century, and why the US embraced Israel later in this post-1967 moment. So I want to emphasize here that the dispossession and settler colonial character of the Israeli state, the dispossession of the Palestinian population, is not an incidental fact in American support for Israel, but it actually is foundational to it. And in this sense, Israel plays a very similar role that South African apartheid played in Western imperialism decades, British and Americans, that we can make with the special plan as well. So why is this important today? This all happened in the 60s and 70s, but it remains true in critical ways in the current moment. These two pillars of American power remain, Israel and the Gulf monarchies. The Gulf, of course, headed by Saudi Arabia, but also recognizing the important role of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, within this. And the Gulf states remain the center of the fossil fuel economy. They are the world's largest exporters of oil and LNG. However, most of those oil exports today are going towards China and East Asia rather than rather than the United States and Western Europe, as historically has been the case. What we see over the last 2 decades are much deeper ties emerging between the Gulf states and China in particular. And we also see the rise of huge national oil companies such as Saudi Aramco, which is really shaping so much of the way that global climate negotiations are taking place globally today. We saw just a few weeks ago, Saudi Aramco, for instance, essentially played the lead role in blocking the treaty around plastics, the global treaty around plastics. Really an indication of how these states, these Gulf oil producers, are not simply just oil exporters, crude oil exporters, but are really becoming central to the making of climate policy in so many ways. So in this context, what the US has attempted to do in the last couple of decades is to integrate and to bring back together their major pillars of power in the Middle East, and that is to knit together, if you like, Israel and the Gulf monarchies, in particular Saudi Arabia. This is really a key aspect of the current moment. It's so clear in terms of the Trump policy. It's an attempt to reassert American primacy in the Middle East through normalizing relationships between Israel and the Gulf states. And this would be very important in the context of any heightened conflict with China. If, for example, the US would like to cut China from the global financial system or impose sanctions on any energy exports to China, then the Gulf states are the critical key node for that to be able to happen. So this is the context, I think, in which we can really read the US support for Israel, the unstinting support, arming of Israel over the last couple of years, and really leading and enabling Israel to carry out this genocide. And it is even more important at this moment of a relative decline in American global power at the global stage. There are many indications of this. I'm happy to speak to this further in discussion, but just to say, if we look, for example, at the patterns of Trump's visits to the Middle East, the first place actually globally that Trump visited after his inauguration was Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, three critical oil and gas producers in the Middle East. And the key message in these visits was to bring these oil producers much more into the American orbit, and to continue to promote this policy of normalization. We should remember that in the last Trump administration, the Abraham Accords, a normalization deal was signed between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, and also Bahrain, another important Gulf oil producer, and Israel. The Abraham Accords led to a free trade agreement between Israel and the UAE. This was the first free trade agreement between Israel and any Arab state. And these developments, this kind of normalization process, would not have happened without Saudi approval, because of Saudi Arabia's key role in the Gulf. Towards normalization is ongoing, it's deepening, it's very evident in the plans that are being discussed by Israel and by the American administration for what to do with Gaza in the wake of this genocide. So I want to just wrap up and just kind of make a couple of key points to end with, and that is to say, I've tried to emphasize why we need to de-exceptionalize Palestine, to think about Palestine through the lens of this bigger Middle East context. It also, I think this approach helps us to see struggles in other parts of the region, in Sudan, in Yemen, in Iraq, as very much connected in a real way to what is going on in Palestine, not simply in a comparative way, but actually deeply connected to the way that American power has emerged in the region over the last few decades. And finally, I want to say, by centering this question of oil, centering the question of fossil fuels in the reasons why the United States continues to be doubling down on this alliance between Saudi Arabia and Israel, we can understand why Palestine is truly a climate issue, why Palestine must be a key lightning rod for any eco-socialist today. We often hear people describe, for example, the ecocide in Gaza Strip, the destruction of the ecosystem as a tactic of war and genocide in Gaza. We often hear people point to the gas reserves in the Eastern Mediterranean and Israel's attempt to control and access these gas reserves. These are true. These are important factors, but this is not the reason why Palestine is a climate issue. Palestine is a climate issue because the Middle East sits at the center of our global oil economy, and it is therefore a key element to American power, and this is why the US continues to support and wage very literally the genocide in Palestine today. Thank you.
Okay. You don't really need me to talk after that. That's incredible. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Adam. That was fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amin, Abbas. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people. As this land was stolen, Palestine was stolen. A genocide has been committed and has been committed in Palestine the last at least 77 years. Genocide has occurred and still occurs here. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Now, the topic that I was given kind of agency as to what I would cover in this panel, and so I'm going to be talking about specifically the lens of viewing the Palestinian issue from a capitalistic lens and how it ties very closely with colonialism. So, you know, for over 77 years, Palestine has held a mirror up to the world. The mirror, it doesn't flatter, but it actually exposes. And for governments, institutions, and community members, we've looked at the mirror. The mirror has put up to our faces, and it asks us, where do you stand when you're confronted with the ongoing dispossession and the genocide of Palestinian people? However, we know that Palestine wasn't exactly a hot topic before 2023. Not everyone, not the mainstream, knew about it. So people could just get away with avoiding that question with a clear conscience. Oh, Palestine, Pakistan, you mean? Where's Palestine? Common questions that they kept asking me. But now, after October 2023, the people have risen and they are holding that mirror right up to the face of every organization, government, and community member. And it is truly testing the moral position and conscience of every single person and organization. And so this is why the panel is called Palestine is the greatest moral test of our time. It is because of this. It is truly the greatest moral test of our time. It's a test of our humanity, where you cannot claim neutrality, otherwise you stand with the oppressor, where silence is a decision and indifference is complicity. So every institution and person that comments on social justice, inclusion, and human rights, everyone has been confronted with Palestine. And their response or refusal to respond has truly sheds a light on where they stand and what they truly stand for. And so a lot of us have to ask the question, why have so many organizations and people failed this moral test? And the answer is not just because of the cowardice, as Adam articulated, it's not just the cowardice because of the fear of the Zionist lobby, but it is because of capitalism. And we know that Palestine is not just a political question, it is an economic one. It shows us that capital moves when morality is on the line. Capitalism rewards profit, not principle. It incentivizes investment, not integrity. And Palestine exposes this very brutal truth. Now, some organizations and people do take a principled stance, like in 2021 when Ben & Jerry's announced that it would stop sales in the occupied Palestinian territory, which did actually trigger a very large dispute with its parent company, Unilever. In August 2025, Norway's sovereign wealth fund, its $2 trillion sovereign wealth fund, had actually said that it would divest from Caterpillar and 5 Israeli banks, citing human rights abuses, which now Donald Trump is trying to lobby and pressure them to reinvest back into Caterpillar. And even the logistics company Maersk, under pressure, pledged to stop servicing and providing logistics to service illegal settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. While these are important developments and wins, they remind us that corporations do respond to public pressure, boycotts, and divestment campaigns, which us, the people, the mainstream, organize and move. And yet, the larger picture actually is complicity. Maersk, that same company that stopped servicing settlements, actually continues to deliver weapon parts of F-35 to Israel. Google and Amazon still deliver the $1.2 billion Project Nimbus cloud contract to Israel, which is used to surveillance Palestinians, and even used to, and actually claims that it's used to surveillance Palestinians in Gaza and to target them and attack them. Israel raised a record sum of $8 billion in 2024 and $5 billion in 2025 in the global bond markets. That's a lot of money. Australia's sovereign wealth fund, the Future Fund, just recently seen that it's increased its holdings in Israeli weapons manufacturer Elbit Systems. It's increased it by 469% in 2024. And Israel's own stock exchange, now, how many of you think that Israel's stock exchange would have gone down since 2023? No? No one? You guessed it. In fact, the Tel Aviv 35 index went from 1,605 in October 23. It's now valued over 3,000 as of this month. It's nearly doubled. All right? It's showing you that despite the genocide and the complicity of Zionism and Israel, wealth and funding still continues to flow into Israel. And still a lot of funding goes into Israeli startups and into Israeli bond markets and to the stock exchange. Palestine is not just about occupation, it is about capitalism and colonialism intertwined. It's about how markets are built on stolen land and dispossessed lives. Capitalism has created an environment where companies can post rainbow logos for Pride Month or mark Reconciliation Week in so-called Australia, but then they turn around and then sell surveillance technology or weapons used against Palestinians and First Nations people here. So Palestine really has unmasked that hypocrisy. And yet, so we see the weight of, even against the weight of capital, it is the ordinary people that rise up, and it is from us running our own boycott campaigns and divestment campaigns that companies feel the pressure. It's examples like this, such as the boycott of McDonald's and Starbucks in the Middle East, where they've had to shut down many branches because of this boycott. It's the student encampments that shook the whole world. It's those kinds of examples that shows us that morality resides in the people, not in the boardrooms. It's in the community. Capitalism did not arrive in Palestine as a neutral system. It arrived hand in hand with colonialism. It financed settlement, it rewarded dispossession, and it profited from war. That's why Lord Balfour cemented Zionism into British foreign policy in the 30s, because he made it clear that Israel would be a front for British imperialism in the Middle East. And the very companies that profit from weapons in Gaza are the same ones that profit from surveillance and policing and exploitation around the world. Capitalism globalizes oppression. It is not just localized to Palestine. And so colonialism captures the land, capitalism extracts the profits. And Palestine sits at the intersection of both. It has showed us that capitalism is a machine of complicity. It produces profits in one column and blood in the other. It is not simply a geography or one people. Though it is deeply about it, it is about where human life can outweigh shareholder returns. And sometimes shareholder returns just matter more to these corporations and governments than human lives. It is where justice can outweigh markets and where the universal values that we claim to uphold so strongly has a greater gravitational pull than capital. And so Palestine forced us to look in the mirror, and the reflection is very uncomfortable. But discomfort is not an excuse, rather it is an invitation. It's an invitation for us to act, an invitation to be courageous, an invitation to ask more from our workplaces, our government, and our circles and our network, that they stand with justice and not just pursue profit. So when we say Palestine is the moral issue of our time, we are also saying it reveals that capitalism's true nature: profit over people, markets over morality, and colonialism over justice. So let us stand where it matters, one side of dignity, liberation, and truth, because none of us are free until Palestine is free from the river to the sea. Thank you.
A land without people, for a people without a land. This was the catch cry of the Zionist movement as it moved to establish a Jewish state on the land of the Palestinian people in the 1930s and 40s. It's a classic colonialist claim, in the same way that Captain James Cook claimed the east coast of Australia on the basis of terra nullius when landing in Botany Bay, home of the Eora people, in 1770. Like Australia, Israel is a colonial settler state. Even back then, the Zionist occupation of Palestine ran contrary to the international law of Europe. But then, just as now, international law carried no real weight. And today, the countless UN, ICC and ICJ resolutions have been completely ignored by the Israeli state and its Western backers. We've seen that international law continues to mean little in the ruthless pursuit of land, of resources, and of geopolitical interests. Between 1947 and 1949, at least 750,000 Palestinians from a 1.9 million population were made refugees beyond the borders of the state. By 1967, Zionist forces had taken more than 78% of historic Palestine, ethnically cleansed and destroyed about 530 villages and cities, and killed about 15,000 Palestinians in a series of mass atrocities, including more than 70 massacres. Of course, there have been many massacres of Palestinians between 1948, the Nakba, and October 7, 2023 and its aftermath. Too many to mention here. But what we have seen since October 23 is Israel attempting to finish the job. A second Nakba, or what many now describe as a Holocaust. A campaign of ethnic cleansing carried out with a savage hate that simultaneously seeks to denigrate and dehumanise an entire people to justify its brutality. While we see the daily devastation wrought on the Palestinian people, a devastation we don't really even have the language for. For me, a 2024 Al Jazeera video simply titled Gaza remains one of the most shocking reflections of this inhumanity. The video draws on the social media postings by Israeli soldiers and civilians celebrating the annihilation of the Palestinians. It is shocking viewing. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but it is truly shocking viewing, and it left me feeling physically ill. How is it that a people who came from a place of trauma, who have grown up with the lessons of the Nazi Holocaust front and centre in their lives and teachings, can become so desensitised to trauma inflicted on others? I read a really illuminating article in a Plus 972 magazine that gave me some insights on this. The author explains that while Israel's long subservient media has spent the past year imbuing the public with a sense of righteousness over the Gaza war, the path to this moment was paved long ago. Israel's media landscape, which has always been subservient to the political and military establishment, has come under relentless pressure from Netanyahu over the last decade. He's transformed it into a tool for wielding power and ultimately ensuring his own political survival. Recent years have seen the rapid rise of a channel widely known as Channel 14, now 14, Israel's version of Fox News, that has openly aligned itself with Netanyahu. It offers viewers not just news, but anti-Palestinian polemics, frequently outwardly genocidal, cooked up as entertainment. Though they also say this is true of pretty much every single mainstream news outlet following October 7, including what was formerly the most popular outlet, Channel 7, which in attempting to claw back ratings seeks to be palatable to everyone, including the fascists who watch Channel 14, and thus provides a platform to people like Yehuda Schlesinger, sorry, I can't say that, who called for making the rape of Palestinian detainees official policy. Israel's plan is to make life so unbearable that the people of Gaza will have no choice but to leave or die. The US and its Western allies, including, of course, our own government, not only supply the weaponry to make this possible, but obstruct the demand of most nations for adherence to international humanitarian law. They have stood by while Israel seeks to bring about its project of Eretz Israel, the seizing of Syrian territory in the Golan Heights, of southern Lebanon, of Gaza, and of course the West Bank, where over 40,000 Palestinians have been driven from their homes, and we know that as Israel plans to annex it in its entirety. Western powers will stand by Israel regardless of which political party or coalition is in power and regardless of public opinion, because they need a state, as others have said, whose purpose is to protect and project Western and in particular United States power in the Middle East. As Joe Biden famously said in 2023, if there were not an Israel, we'd have to invent one. In 1986, when Biden was a member of the US Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, he opposed the sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia because they were not able to become agents of US interests in the Persian Gulf region. It wasn't, he said, about whether the Saudis were good guys or bad guys, but about the ability of the Saudis to help advance and secure US interests. The naked self-interest of the US, he said, should always guide US Middle East policy, and that his support for Israel is situated within that self-interest. Well, there it is. He leaves us in no doubt. But in general, and in the current context, that's not how they couch it. Not even with a Trump administration in power. You probably can't be quite so brazen, particularly in the midst of a genocide that is seeing millions of people in protest the world over. So they employ their ideological weapon, anti-Semitism. Of course, this is not new. For many decades now, both Israel and its supporters have exploited Jewish fears about persecution and Western guilt about the Holocaust in order to weaponise them against Palestinians. This has had a huge impact on Western public opinion, shielded Israel from scrutiny, and given it a free pass to break international law. I do need to say here, I think it's important to be clear that there's no question that anti-Semitism is real and that we must oppose and fight it, just as we must oppose and fight any and every manifestation of racism. But exceptionalising Jews and smearing legitimate criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism does not make Jews safe. It threatens to fuel, in fact, all the crackpot Jewish conspiracy theories and make anti-Semitism worse. It's also worth noting here, and this is just an aside really, that I couldn't bear to leave out, that special envoy to combat anti-Semitism, Gillian Segal, has remained silent in the face of the recent March for Australia, led in most cities by self-confessed National Socialists, and where the Sydney organiser made a speech calling the Diary of Anne Frank a hoax. Supporters of Israel, including Australian politicians, refer to October 7 as the greatest number of Jewish deaths since the Holocaust. They state this as a fact, but actually this is not true. More Jews were killed resisting the right-wing dictatorship during the Dirty War in Argentina in the late 1970s. 1,296 Jewish victims are known by name. But when taking into account the disappeared, the true number is thought to be closer to 3,000. Indeed, Jews were targeted. They constituted 12% of the victims, while only 1% of the overall population. And Israel supplied the Argentinian dictatorship with weapons during this period, along with other right-wing dictatorships in Latin America. But don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Connecting October 7 to the Holocaust serves an ideological purpose. While there is no doubt that it was a terribly traumatic event for Israeli society, and the deaths of all people, both Israeli and Palestinian, is a tragedy, linking October 7 to the Holocaust in a causal sense turns history on its head. Israeli war propaganda does this also, calling the Palestinians Nazis, motivated by anti-Semitism. This, of course, is nonsense. Israel is the oppressor and the Palestinians the oppressed. Palestinian resistance is motivated by oppression, not anti-Semitism. In all such cases of systematic oppression, it is the violence of the oppressor that is the cause. It is the violence of the oppressor that determines the violence of the oppressed in revolt. While the disingenuous charge of anti-Semitism has served them well, many are now seeing through it. The mask is falling. And in recent weeks, we have begun to see some political figures and some media cautiously break ranks. While in the streets, many more are recognising Israel as a colonial, settler, apartheid ethno-state that is committing mass murder. The Palestinian cause has become the flag of the global South and of a major part of public opinion, including many Jews in Europe and in the United States. As Gabor Mate has said, every era seems to have a moral touch point. And today, Palestine is the moral touch point of our time. There are people the world over who are risking expulsion and defamation, risking imprisonment, risking their jobs and careers to protest the genocide. There are Jews being arrested on the streets of Frankfurt, of London, and blocking Grand Central Station in New York, dock workers in Genoa threatening to block Europe. And within Israel, we've begun to see the emergence of protest, not just about the retrieval of Israeli hostages, but expressing opposition to the genocide and deliberate starvation of the Palestinians. Yes, it's taken a long time, and it's still not enough Israelis taking that position, but we are beginning to see that. And we've also seen an increasing number of refusers, young Israelis burning their IDF draft cards in protest at Israel's genocide in Gaza and going to prison as a result. In July this year, the newly formed Hague Group gathered representatives of more than 30 global South states in Colombia to set up an emergency plan aimed at halting Israel's assault on Gaza and the West Bank. Among the resolutions, measures to block the transfer of arms and other military equipment to Israel were present. Well, these efforts stand in stark contrast to the US and Western European powers who so often proclaim themselves to be the leaders of the free and democratic world and yet take measures that achieve the opposite. Think of the measures they have taken of late. The sanctioning of the ICC and ICJ officials, the refusal to cooperate with arrest warrants issued for Israeli officials, and continued military support for Israel. As Carlos Cruz Mosquera wrote recently in Jacobin, Israel's settler colonial violence against Palestinians is something the global South understands viscerally. Whether it is the more recently inflicted wounds that mark society in countries like South Africa or the scarred over colonial injuries suffered by Latin Americans, the legacies of which continue to inspire rebellion across these regions, these serve to unite them in a common struggle against historically shared injustices. And I've just lost a page, which seems to be my catch. Way of operating lately. I did this the other day at the rally. Don't want to break tradition, sorry. It was Nelson Mandela who long before South Africa filed a case against Israel at the ICJ in December 2023, stated that Palestine was the greatest moral issue of our time. Though 3 decades have passed since he expressed that sentiment, these words remain as relevant today. Indeed more so than they were back then. As Francesca Albanese has said, Palestine's immense suffering has cracked open the possibility of transformation. It's not all positive. We're seeing an incredible polarisation, bringing forward the best and the worst. Emboldened by Trump's return and in the grip of Islamophobic rhetoric, we are seeing both a rise of the far right at one end of the spectrum and concerted attempts in Western countries to crack down on our most basic civil liberties, attack immigration, dictate what universities, schools, arts and media can and can't say. At the other end, we're seeing a mobilisation of millions the world over who want an end to colonialism and to genocide, who are learning in many cases for the first time of the struggles in Sudan, in Congo, in West Papua, in Myanmar, who are beginning to take a stand and demand peace and justice. Palestine is the moral touchpoint that is drawing millions to question the old ethos, to demand a better world. We need to act swiftly and in many and varied ways, as I think we all understand that Palestine can't wait. This must be a moment when history changed course, when we reaffirm our opposition to colonialism, to war, to racism and oppression, and where we demand that our voice is heard. Thank you.
So good. Thank you so much to all the speakers, Adam, Amin and Janet. We're going to go to contributions and questions from the floor. And I'll ask that people just keep them to 3 minutes, and then we'll get quite a few of us in. And Adam is still online, hopefully. Hi, Adam. So again, we'll also pass around the contact sheet for Green Left and Socialist Alliance if you're not on it already. So thanks, Jordan. And there is a reminder as well that there is the art festival launch at 6:30. So after this is over, we'll all go get a drink and then come back up to room 405. Okay, so we'll have 3 questions, comments. We'll go Alex and then these two up. One here and up the back. Alex. And if people can come to the mic, that would be great. Thanks very much.
Hi there. Yeah, I've got a question, I guess. I mean, especially for Adam, but really for all the speakers, I'm actually interested. And it's actually not really about morality. It's actually more about politics and imperial power. And I guess I've been thinking about recently some of the aspects of the US and Australian war against Afghanistan. And when you think about that, you sort of like this whole idea about ruthless targeting of civilians, war crimes, lying to the public, like none of that is new. Vietnam, East Timor, there's lots of examples of it. I mean, so in one sense, what Israel is doing in Palestine today is 100% a continuity with normal everyday imperialism. On the other hand, this does feel like it is something new and it's at a new level. And so I've got 2 questions that are a bit related. One is kind of a bit like, why is the US letting Israel get away with it? I mean, we're all aware of the famous example of, Ronald Reagan telling Beijing to tone it down. When Ronald Reagan did that, that wasn't a sort of an anti-imperialist sort of pro-Palestinian statement. That was under pressure from Saudi Arabia, and it was, so obviously the US could have restrained Israel more if they had wanted to. So the question is, why didn't they? What does that actually say? Is this just Joe Biden's personal Zionism? Is it something to do with what's happening internal to Israeli politics that the US just had to go along with that, or else they'd risk losing Israel altogether? I guess to me, I feel more like, is this actually just a harbinger of the capitalist crisis that we're moving into? And, because it strikes me they are burning up so much of their political capital on the side of the capitalist class. They are burning up so much goodwill. I mean, there's all the people that sort of talk about this is going to be the end of Israel as a Zionist sort of entity, if not, now, but 12 months, 2 years, whatever time frame you put on it. And to be honest, that seems plausible. And I could well imagine a sort of a pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist argument for restraining Israel more than what the US has done. So I guess that's my question. How do we understand why is the US letting Israel get away with this, and what does this mean for the future of Israel itself? I mean, is this actually the end of Zionism?
Awesome, thanks, Alex. We'll have the come right up here. And Andrew, if you just want to sit here so you can jump up.
Okay, I'll start. I'll ask a number of questions, but just to answer yours, why is United States supporting it? Because, it's connected with what I was going to ask. I think the reason why they are supporting it is because the Western ruling classes and imperialism generally has used the Holocaust as a justification for its imperial aggression, particularly after the Second World War. They present themselves as the defenders of the survivors of the Nazi Holocaust, which basically they claim gives them justification to commit other Holocausts like we are witnessing, or supporting other Holocausts like we are witnessing in Palestine. Now, the question and comment that I wanted also to make is, how did I think Janet Parker asked this question, how did the survivors of the Holocaust become so desensitized? Now, I would say that the Zionist establishment has been extremely skillful in the way it has manipulated the consciousness of the Jewish masses. I come actually from a Holocaust survivor family. And the way it's manipulated this is by identifying Palestinian struggle and the oppression of the Palestinians by identifying them with fascism and the Nazis. This is one thing that they've been using. The other question that the other kind of trope that they have used is, well, ethnocentrism and ethno-nationalism. They've appropriated all the nationalist tropes from the nationalism of 19th century, which ended up, of course, with Nazi nationalism, Prussia and so on, and we can see what happened during the Second World War. And I think what we've got to, as a revolutionary left, do is to devise ways to basically expose these ruses and these untruths.
We do enjoy comments as well as questions, and we will go to the panel after one more. Was it Renfrey or was it Ron? Ron, we'll go with you, and
thanks for that. Yeah, I suppose Australian super funds and genocide, seeing we're talking about the economics of these things, and when Francesca Albanese came out and she stated the different companies that were complicit, as she saw it, I think that there's more in that area that we probably should be doing, especially being Australians, having all of our super fund tied up into these areas. And I guess it's the reporting season that's coming up for companies, and you've got Coles that were asked about 2 AGMs ago about their investment and their use of Plantier, I think it's the company. So there's a lot of room in that area, but most of us feel comfortable that in 2018, Australian companies legally were obliged to sign up to modern day slavery. They have to report if they're over a certain amount of $1 million funding. They have to make a report of what they've done and how they've made sure that doesn't happen. So maybe we need to be pushing or linking the two together, that the companies can be actually free from modern day slavery, but then they can be complicit in genocide. And maybe if we give everybody, all the Gazans, a job description, maybe they can they can have a complaint, and maybe we can chase our funds a little bit better than that. So I guess without going too much further into it, but I guess your feeling back on that. But let me just say that Chevron, not only with Delek Brothers oil company, I think they've changed their name now, and drilling for gas off Gaza, they're also doing it off Western Sahara, and that does not get as much, well, it doesn't get any credit that it should be. And I just saw recently that there is discussions in the Israeli paper that maybe the Gazans could have a better life in Western Sahara. So a nice solution for.
Yes. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, comrade. Yeah, thanks, and thanks very much for the other two presentations. I think they're really insightful, and I enjoyed listening very much. I guess I'll respond. To Alex's question around the US, Israel, and I wouldn't phrase it as the US. I think we need to be much more active in the way we think. Can you hear me okay?
You paused for a while, but we can hear now.
Lost him. Adam, can you hear us? We've lost you. If you turn off your video, we might get your audio.
He's left the Zoom.
No, he's left. Okay, what we might do, comrades, is we'll go to... Yep.
I'll answer the question. I think, firstly to Alex's question, I agree. I think Adam will have a lot more to speak about with expanding the framework of how we view Israel, and he will talk about from the Middle Eastern lens and capitalism within Middle East. If I could also just talk about within the U.S. context, where at the time of Ronald Reagan, I guess presidents didn't have as much levers restricting them to support Israel unconditionally. All right, and what I mean by that is that if you think about how Zionism has progressed over the decades, well, the Zionist lobby has become more powerful. It's able to fund politicians a lot more. The military lobby, we've seen it that they're investing very heavily in military. Since the Second World War, basically every single worker, almost the majority of workers were focusing on producing military equipment. The military industry has become absolutely vital for the American economy and for it to exist and even survive to ensure its power. And for it to do that, it has to lobby the politicians, and that's how they get a lot of their money. We also have seen the rise of imperialism in U.S. imperialism in the region, and the likes of them taking control of oil refineries in Syria, in Chevron extracting natural gas off the shores of Gaza, and them taking off profits from Kuwaiti oil because they went and saved Kuwait. They gave them freedom from Iraqi invasion. It's all basically centered around profits. And if I could also just talk about within the local context of the US, if you think about the Christian Zionist movement and how it's grown exponentially over the decades, with the belief that if they send all the Jews back to Israel and the Messiah will return, with groups like Christians United for Israel, CUFI, that movement has grown significantly since the time of Ronald Reagan. So we have to remember that Christian Zionists, the majority of Zionists are Christian, and they exist in US, and they'll go to Israel, and they will unconditionally support Zionists in Israel in their mission to continuously dispossess Palestinians. And a lot of them sometimes are just oblivious and naive to the struggles of Palestinians. They never get a Palestinian tour guide to show them the struggles of Palestine. So yeah, that's my answer to Alex's question. I missed your question, the second gentleman, but to the answer to the third gentleman about Australian super funds, you're absolutely right. We do need more people to be able to push for this. What's the profit that you get from slavery? And at some point it was like, well, the reputational risk and reputational damage of us continuing to rise up and call them out, eventually it'll be like, well, yeah, we have to push modern day slavery policy now. And it's going to be critical for us to actually not to exploit people. However, when it comes to the context of humans outside of our country, we actually don't really, some people don't even care. Some people don't care about Palestinians being killed, let alone about the profits being generated by a lot of these corporations. It takes 13% of a population to create meaningful change for the government to act according to the population. I mean, we're getting a lot of people that are attending our rallies. Many of them don't even know about their super funds investing in weapons manufacturers. I mean, there's a level of education that we have to take people on for them to understand about colonization, capitalism, intertwine, and how it also exists in Palestine, and they're profiting off your money in super funds, your super funds investing in weapons manufacturers. I mean, we have a campaigner in APAN whose literal full-time job is to work on campaigns like these, and these are mammoths that we're trying to fight against. So we need to leverage each other and as group members, and for members of super funds to tell other members of super funds that they mobilize and they keep pushing their super funds and pressure them to divest from Israel. And if we're seeing Australia's own sovereign wealth fund increase like by 5 times its investments in Elbit systems, then that's a very telling sign that we have a lot more work to do, unfortunately. Capital gains is just very attractive right now for the future fund compared to the hundreds of thousands of lives lost in Gaza, sadly. So we've got a lot of work to do. Anyways, that's my response.
Yeah, look, I'm also
sorry
keen.
about that, comrades. So let me respond to Alex's question. I think I wouldn't frame it as why is the US allowing Israel to get away with this? I would frame it much more actively and actually say the US is the one in the driving seat here. It's the US that is arming, funding, and blocking any censure of Israel on the world stage. And I think the reason for that is the larger, bigger question of the global capitalism, and in particular the relative decline of American power that really runs through all of the major political questions globally today. And in the context of the Middle East, Israel is doing exactly what it has always done, and that is to act against any forces, movements that might be not aligned with the US in the region. We've seen this in Lebanon, we've seen this in Iran, we've seen this in Gaza. And this is a bipartisan policy. It's not something that's just under Trump. It's something that stretches back several decades, and it's something that was really facilitated through the Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, go for it.
Sorry, yes. So I was saying I think this is an attempt by the United States to reassert its primacy in the region, and really to beat back those powers, those states that have facilitated and led to this kind of relative decline of American power, both globally and in the region. And this is a bigger, longer game that the United States is playing with the view of China, I think, in the longer term. So we can see this in the context of the meetings that have been happening
Adam, we've lost you again. Would you consider turning off your video to see if that assists with the Wi-Fi audio? Okay, comrades, we're going to go with Janet, and hopefully Adam's going to come back to us with audio. Janet, do you want to...
I'm not sure if I've got any great insights into this. I think the other speakers are better sort of able to address it. But I think the other thing that perhaps is worth considering is when you think about the impact or how long it took to bring about the downfall of apartheid in South Africa, and how significant things like trade union bans and so on were in that. It's really quite recent that we've had these huge marches, the 300,000 in Sydney, the 30,000 in Perth, which for us is enormous. But we still don't have buy-ins from crucial sectors of international economies. You know, I mentioned the Genoa workers threatening to shut down Europe because that's one of the few initiatives that we've heard on that scale. But I feel like there needs to be a far greater groundswell among the more significant sectors of the economy that can actually shut the place down. You know, it's not just a slogan when we say shut it down at the protests. I think that's what it's going to take to really to actually force the US and force some of the Western governments to the table. We're a long way from that, I feel, at the moment. We really need to, as well as doing a lot of work on super funds and so on, I feel like we need to do a lot more targeted work in relation to trade unions, getting them on board. And I acknowledge all the problems with the secondary boycotts legislation and how that limits them and so on. But we need them to be able to say, we are going to defy this. We're going to do this regardless. And that's what it's going to take. In relation to into the question about the desensitisation, I was read a lot of information from sort of people who either grew up in Israel or grew up in the sort of the completely immersed in Zionist culture and beliefs, who say that from the youngest age, their children's books talked about Palestinians as cockroaches and insects, and while I know there's an element of liberal Zionism, and I know there are people in Israel historically who have stood with the Palestinians and who have supported them across the border at times and that sort of thing, there is this deep-centred racism and fear of what the Palestinian people are going to do. I think that's so deep-seated, and of course, as I mentioned the media shows and how they present the struggle of the Palestinians or the fight against the Palestinians, because I think it really at an ideological level, this is incredibly deep-seated and incredibly powerful tool that they've used. Beyond that, I'm not sure what else. I think it is good. I mean, my understanding is that so many of the mobilisations to date have been primarily around getting the hostages back, but you are seeing that change, and I'm hoping that now yeah, there is a recognition that things have gone beyond the pale, and that it's no longer, they need to. And also I think the fact that Hamas is now, I mean, they have been for a long time, but they've been offering to let all the hostages go as if there's a ceasefire. That's got to start to filter through too, in terms of the really strong sentiment against Netanyahu. So.
And we've got Adam, you're back. Excellent. Adam, if you'd like to continue on the question of the US and Israel's strength.
Yes. So what I was saying, I'm not sure how much you caught of me last time, but what I was saying is that I think this is actually Israel is doing what it has always done in terms of its role as a key ally of American power in the region. And the US is actually pushing this to happen because it sees the path to reasserting its primacy in the Middle East and also globally through the Middle East, through this normalization project between Israel and the Gulf states. And this is very clear if you look at the discussions that happened in the White House a couple of weeks ago, where this was very clearly laid out. It's also clear if you look at the discussions from the Heritage Foundation, a major driver of American politics today. But I would say this is a bipartisan and long-standing aspect of American strategy in the region. And it goes right back to the 1990s and the Oslo Accords, which was billed at the time as a peace agreement, but it was nothing like a peace agreement. It was actually about facilitating this regional normalization process between Israel, Jordan and Egypt at the time, Gulf states. So I think this is a reason why the US is pushing this so consistently.
Okay, thanks very much, Adam. That's great. We got you there. We'll go with Sam and then Mick, and then we'll go with John.
Yeah, thanks to the panellists. That was really great. Just a couple of quick points and then some questions. First is, I think it's just worth us remembering that even though the early state of Israel definitely wanted European Jewish refugees from Europe directed towards Israel, that the Zionists actually had quite a low, were actually pretty down on Holocaust survivors. They regard them as broken people they weren't the human material that were going to build this bold new colonial settler outpost. And it was only in the late 60s that there was a very conscious decision to weaponise Holocaust memory against the Palestinians and against criticism of Israel. Of course, it's no coincidence that happens in the late 60s, precisely when the United States itself makes its decisive turn to backing Israel as its main projection of power in the region, and of course a rise of Palestinian resistance. But before then, Europe, people in the West knew that the Holocaust happened, but it had nothing to do with the Palestinians. It didn't come up in the same sentence. It didn't need to, because there was no logical connection. I think that we should do in terms of broadening out the movement in Australia is, it's true that the Christian Zionists, have this total support for Israel, because they confuse biblical Israel with the modern state of Israel. I think they have the same thing. But I think that's where we need to reach out to the sort of more mainstream Christian churches, and we need to make them part of the movement as well. I mean, the Uniting Church very belatedly, put out it was a very full apology, a sort of mea culpa for not having spoken out sooner. But we need them to be leading the charge about what, Israel is literally blowing to bits the oldest Christian community in the world. Now, my question, I suppose, both to Amin and to Adam is, the Israeli historian Ilan Paped talks about this being the final stage of Zionism, that this is the final chapter, but he also says that could take a while, and that it could be its most violent phase as well. And another point he makes is he says that if the Israeli state were to totally collapse tomorrow, that the Palestinian organisations wouldn't yet be in a position to fill the vacuum either. Now, is this the final chapter? I guess that's the question I'm asking. There's no question that the perception of Israel I think is irretrievably, broken in Western public opinion, especially amongst young people. There's been a generational shift. I don't think there's any question about that. There's also been a generational collapse of unconditional support for Israel amongst young Jews in the United States. All those things are true. But it's also true, for instance, that our movement in Australia is still not yet strong enough to force our government to actually do real concrete things. And it's still so true, for instance, that the Arab street is still not strong enough to stop even the Gulf states exporting oil to Israel as we speak. So is it the final, is it the final chapter? I mean, maybe it gives us a sense of the final chapter, but do you think Ilan Pappé is right on that score? And just a question to Janet too, maybe if you could just tell people a little bit about how Jews for Palestine got formed, where it's going, and what it's done.
I just want to take up one question about the unions that Janet raised, and it's a reality of the unions at this point in time. I mean, a lot of people, me being a union organiser, obviously ask why aren't the unions taking action, and is it because of the secondary boycott rules? Is it because of the laws? It's got nothing to do with that. The unions at this point in time have not even circulated a single leaflet across the jobs calling for peace. They have not circulated a single leaflet calling for the end of the genocide. They have not circulated a single leaflet calling for a boycott on Israel. None of it. So that's the low level that we're actually at inside the union movement. And comrades need to understand that, because when we target the unions to start to take industrial action, we've got to educate the members before we can ever get to that stage, and the unions are refusing to educate the members. That's the first line, that's the first base. Now, my union, ANW, passes great motions about Palestine, passes all the motions through the Labor Party conference. They all came from the ANW. Yet I'm still arguing inside the union to distribute a basic leaflet explaining what is going on inside Palestine. We did it with the Voice. There was pushback from a lot of the members. Unfortunately, it was Anglos normally. Primarily Anglos were the ones who walked out of the meetings, mass meetings that I held. But that conversation was an important conversation that we had to have with the members. Nobody left the union over it. We had arguments. We've got to do the same with Palestine. And I think that's where activists need to realign and look at that and say to the unions, why won't you do this? They don't want to put too much pressure on the Labor Party. Michelle O'Neill and Sally McManus have never spoken at a rally. That is another disgrace. There's plenty of politicians who have never spoken at rallies who say good things to us. They should be outed as well. But that's the reality at this point in time. My main question I would have asked of Adam, if it's capable, possible, it's probably not, is I would like to hear a bit more about the state of the movement inside the UK and the state of the movement inside Europe in general, because I think that's the sort of important stuff that would be good for us to hear.
Awesome, thanks, Mick. I'm going to try and get to John with the mic, so you don't have to move. Oh, okay.
If you look at the history of colonialism, and my father was in the IRA and in 1917, and he talked about the discrimination he experienced in Australia, even, he's called an Irish bastard and all the rest. Now, guess who has supported the Palestinians? The Irish government. So there's these people who have a history of colonialism and racism. They'll support each other. And I guess I'm a bit Irish-centric in that. I think that's... but Ireland is the oldest colony of the British Empire. And Palestine was created by the British Empire when they won the First World War as part of that coalition, and when the Zionist movement from Europe, which didn't react to the Holocaust, of course, this is before the First World War, they reacted to anti-Semitic European governments. The famous case of Spain, where the not only were the Islamicists chucked out of Spain, but they also chucked out the Jews, and that was happened in the 19th century. And so, as a result of that, in the late 19th century, there started to become this Zionist movement, which didn't have much effect at the time, but gradually got taken up by the British Empire. And they were the ones who, because of the... And also I must mention that those Jews that were expelled from Spain in the 19th century, they were taken into the Islamicist Ottoman Empire. They took them in from Spain. So this is a total reversal of all this crap about, the anti-Semitism and all this. They took them in. And their presence maybe in the Middle East, especially, would be, right from the start of that whole period of racism and stuff that came up. So anyway, that's what I wanted to think. I think there's a long view of this history, and it shows that it goes far back before that, and that the British Empire was the one who was, I think, established the Zionist state. Like they actually inadvertently did so. So,
Thanks to the panellists. Very interesting and thought-provoking discussion. I just wanted to add a couple of comments, and I'd be interested to hear all your thoughts about, I guess, building the Palestine movement, really. I come from Sydney, and I was part of the 300,000 strong march on Sydney Harbour Bridge. It was absolutely phenomenal in the driving rain. You wonder how big it would have been if there was sun shining. Actually, I think it probably would have doubled. It was absolutely phenomenal. And then only a couple of weeks later, we see the Zio Fest happening on the Gold Coast with Defence Minister Miles and my local mayor and Minister for something else is up there and giving greetings. This is really an orchestration of the pro-Zionist lobby groups in Australia, but it's all orchestrated by, fundamentally the Combat Anti-Semitism movement, which is an Israeli group connected to Netanyahu and the IDF, and funded by the US. Anyway, they had this confest on the Gold Coast, and we need to find out exactly what they have or haven't agreed to. But anyway, it was a demonstration, really, I think, of the fact that you can have these very big marches, and that's terrific. But look at how tied in the Labor Party is to, in this case, directly Israel, and the sorts of policies that they want the state, the Australian state, to introduce, including a particular definition of what constitutes anti-Semitism, but also how local governments now have to start to introduce anti-protest laws, essentially, where you won't be able to put BDS motions or, anything like that. So it's a reminder, actually, that to some extent, it's taken 2 years to build up to this huge, relatively spontaneous mass mobilisation. We shouldn't diss it in any way, but how do we then deepen the movement? I mean, some of the discussion has already happened here. Because Labor being in government is so tied to the US empire. It is absolutely the other colonial settler outpost in the region. And you see those ties so clearly. I think the AUKUS Pact has also had an impact on what Labor's deciding to do now. So in this moment, the question of the lack of trade union response is absolutely essential for the left, I think. And it's a tricky one because even with the big march across Sydney Harbour Bridge, you know, one brave union put their hand up, the ASU was the first one, and then the day almost before the march, after Chris Minns, our state premier, had tried to ban it and got, you know, told off by the Supreme Court, no, you can't do that, suddenly union after union after union was signing on to the march. But as Mick's just said, a sign-on is one thing. It's totally a separate matter for how do you get your members actively involved. So, you know, Labor's in government when this genocide is happening. During the Iraq War, Labor was in opposition. Very easy from an opposition situation to say, oh yes, that was very bad, shouldn't do that. So yeah, I think it is a question that would be great if Adam had any thoughts or comments on that, and obviously the comrades here would be great too.
Thanks, Pip. We'll go with Adam and then Amin and then Janet, and then we'll finish up, comrades.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for those great questions. Maybe I'll pick up on firstly Sam's query about is this the end of Zionism or the final stage of Zionism? I mean, I wouldn't put it in that sense. I think it's contradictory, the situation, in the sense that on one hand, as we've heard today, actually, Israel is economically and militarily stronger than ever, in the sense that its stock market is booming. It is in the high-tech sector, in the military sector. Israeli capital is booming. That link with the United States and Western Europe is as strong as and is intensifying. So at that level, the Israeli state looks strong, and it certainly I wouldn't say it's about to collapse at any moment. I think there is a problematic discourse in some parts of the Palestinian movement that try to say, you know, Israel is about to collapse at that level, which I think is false. But on the other hand, which again some of the speakers have pointed to, if we look at the tremendous outpouring over the last couple of years, the huge demonstrations, the movements that have spread across the world, not just in the global north. We have never seen such a large, sustained movement in solidarity with Palestine in history, I would say. Looking even back to like the Second Intifada in the early 2000s, or the First Intifada in the late 1980s, early 1990s, we didn't see such a movement at this scale. There is a reason that capitalist states are moving to repress Palestine solidarity in such a deep way, because Palestine has become the leading edge of a much deeper radicalization that is not just located around the question of Palestine. It's about the problems that we see globally, and I think that's very clear. So at that level, I see enormous hope, and I want to emphasize that this is not just in Australia, the UK, Europe, US. It is something that is global. It is something that is present in the region itself. In the countries of the region, at the popular level, we see a deep sympathy, understanding, and solidarity with the Palestinian struggle and the plight of people in Gaza. The problem is that the states in the region, like Egypt, like Jordan, and elsewhere, are repressing their domestic populations and preventing that solidarity from actually affecting policy. And this is, again, a long-standing strategy of this normalization process, to put in power in key states like Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, leaders that will be allied to the United States, that will support the genocide, regardless of what they might say publicly. They are the front line in support of the genocide. So at that level, I think we need to understand the kind of political problems. I would say, and coming to Pip's, I think, made a very important point here about the immense importance of deepening the politics of how we speak about Palestine. And that's why I was trying to emphasize today, seeing Palestine in the region, not just in terms of what is going on in the occupied territories or in Israel itself. Understanding Palestine's bigger place in American imperialism, Western imperialism, including the Australian government, of course, and also the links around eco-socialism and the climate crisis. But the other side to this, I think that's very important, is recognizing how the longer trajectory of how we got to where we are today. And in particular, the 1990s, the Oslo process, and the ways in which negotiations around statehood and the promise of a Palestinian state actually brought us to where we are today. This is what created this Palestinian Authority. This is what created the Gaza Strip and the blockade that existed in Gaza. And this is, I think, a real weakness politically in the movement more generally, is not understanding actually the link, this longer term trajectory, and understanding that moments of so-called quiet and these negotiations around so-called peace agreements, which certainly we're going to return to at some point in the future, is actually about deepening and continuing Zionist colonization. There is a deep link between what we see today, the hard right, the genocidal policies of the Israeli government, and that moment of the 1990s. And I think that's the kind of political education that needs to be put more in the upfront, because we're certainly seeing, this talk of statehood really rising in the last few months, and I think that's going to continue. Finally, just on Mick's question about the UK, I think in many ways it's very similar to what you've described in the Australian context. There is a Labor Party obviously in power. This is a pro-imperialist Labor Party through and through. Israel all the way, despite maybe one or two dissenting voices of the opposition in the Labor Party, but in general, the British Labour Party has always been an imperialist party, and it continues to play that role today. Likewise, the union movement, the labour movement, at the official level, the big trade unions are also have little, apart from issue some mealy-mouthed statements, but still stand very much with Britain foreign policy in the region. But at the same time, we see all these aspects of the huge demonstrations, student movements, occupations, worker struggles from below, coupled with this criminalisation of speech that has perhaps moved much further in the UK under the Labour Party than was under the Conservatives, and I think probably much further than even in Australia. So this is, I think, kind of the next front, is this criminalisation of speech around Palestine. And I think the reasons for this, as I said, are very much because Palestine is not just about Palestine. It's becoming and has become a symptom of capitalist crisis more globally, and that's why rulers are so concerned about putting these movements back in their box and crushing and preventing these movements. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed the discussion and the questions that were so thoughtful today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. Big round of applause. And if you stick around for the last two final contributions, we might do a photo shoot just to see how your day goes. But thanks again, Adam. We'll go to Amin.
Yeah, great questions. Firstly, to Sam. Zionism, I say, became popular in the 40s after the Second World War, particularly when basically the British and the US were kind of like, oh, we prefer, I think in the 1910s, it was very much about anti-Semitism motive behind Zionism. We don't want the Jews in the UK, ship them off to Israel. And then eventually it evolved into, oh, it could be an imperialist front for us. And then eventually it became, well, actually, we can profit very heavily from it. And in the 1960s is where it really cemented. So you're absolutely right in saying that. To your question, is this the final chapter? I don't think so. This is a vital chapter in history. Is it the final chapter? Well, if it is, it's going to be a very long one. I don't think look, as a Palestinian, I'd love to think that Israel is going to collapse within the next year and we can liberate Palestine and everyone from the river to the sea, regardless of religion, creed, whatever, will have full democratic rights. The reality is, Israel is rich. It is getting richer. Despite a lot of businesses suffering, the military complex is getting richer. They are building more settlements. They have approved doubling the number of settlements over the last year in the West Bank. I mean, surely, where is that money it's coming from? I don't think it's going to be the final chapter. There's still a long way to go. And in terms of why Arabs are not rising up and pushing more, for context, I grew up in Kuwait for 17 years. There has been, I guess it's almost unanimous. Anyone who lives in Kuwait supports Palestine. Now, more recently, Kuwait has started to ban rallies in support of Palestine, despite being unanimous. And this is a very clear direction of the whole region moving towards normalization. All right. So to me, another thing to answer your question, is this the final chapter? No, because the Arab countries are moving towards normalization. It is very clear to me that Saudi is moving much closer to it. With the UAE now, the free trade agreement, as Adam mentioned, and also with the countless number of flights and tourists coming in from Israel into UAE and vice versa as well. I would say Arabs and Arab states have become quite dictatorial in how they govern their people. They will suppress rallies. I mean, if you thought the suppression of people coming in for the Gaza Sumud walk to Gaza was suppressive, dare I say, they're lucky they didn't get shot, because that's what happens in some of the protests in those Arab countries if you protest for Palestine. I think the last question I'll probably answer is to your question about building a movement. Different people will have a different opinion about it. I see movement building, well, look, I'll tell you, I guess, how I position myself, right? I look at it from a cultural perspective. A lot of people will know about Palestine as capitalism, colonialism, protests. Not a lot of people know about Palestine. Like, what is Palestine? What is Palestinian food? What is Palestinian identity? What is Palestinian history? What is Palestinian dance, the debke? And this is what I do, is that I have positioned myself to say, well, I want to build a movement in the sense that a lot of people will not go to rallies. They won't go to movie screenings, but they would want to enjoy the food. They'd want to understand more about Palestine. And so I do this within my means through pushing debke, for example. And many people come to my debke classes, have never attended a rally. They just do not have that political education or even the willingness. They still think rallies are like aggressive and not a place to go to. So for me, it's like, well, this is my way of building a movement. We have a way where we can build a movement from a trade union perspective. We'll have it from within our group's perspective, within the queer movement, within the workers' movement, within the whatever movement. I think there's always more we can do to meet people where they are. I think the whole notion that if you haven't mobilized for Palestine, you will never mobilize for Palestine, it's a fallacy. I reject that completely. I believe that we have to meet where the masses are and allow the masses to understand that to know who we are as a people. There are still people to this day who I work with that still think Palestinians are terrorists and we throw gays off rooftops and all of these disgusting stereotypes. And I find that, is it their fault? Or is it just that the Zionist complex is just so powerful and so convincing in its narrative that it has actually brainwashed everyone to think that? So that's why for me it's like, well, how do we build a movement? It requires patience. It requires strategy. We have to be very deliberate and understand where people are, and we have to meet them where they are. But also a lot of that onus sometimes is that we have to remain, in being patient, it's very hard, but we also have to remain very emotionally in tune, because it is so hard to do this while a genocide is happening. And it's very hard for people to understand how heavy it is to advocate for Palestine rationally, logically, and also lovingly when you're watching the scenes coming out of Gaza. But that is the sad reality. We have to we have to be patient, we have to be loving, and we have to be understanding and logical and rational. Thank you for the questions, everyone. What an honor and pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amin. We're going to go with Janet.
Okay, so, well, as some of you will know, that the campaign, the Combat Anti-Semitism movement that organised the Gold Coast thing this weekend, issued a leaflet, a flyer to all its participants yesterday that listed all the things that are anti-Semitic, definitively anti-Semitic, and they include watermelons, they include kafirs, they include the phrase, the demand, Free Palestine. So there's an entire page of these things, apparently. So we still have a long way to go, comrades, in terms of, I've read some stuff over recent months where people have sort of suggested that maybe we've gone beyond that whole anti-Semitic, we've crossed that barrier and we've won that debate now. I don't think we have. And certainly they are going at it for everything, for all that they're worth. They are going to use that as their ongoing weapon for as long as it possibly it can stay afloat. So that's why we set up Jews for Palestine, and it really was just a matter of standing at a rally with a sign saying, this Jew stands with Palestine in Perth, that then coalesced over a period of weeks, other people who were coming to those rallies who were Jewish who thought, yeah, let's, and then we painted a banner, and then we painted two banners, and then we did film screenings, and then we did, forums, and we've done statements every time something outrageous happens, and we've worked with the Teachers for Palestine in doing trying to persuade the education department that they shouldn't be putting out an educational anti-racism resource where their only stakeholder they consult with is the Jewish Community Council of WA, and where it's just going to be, there's no recognition of Palestinian racism or Islamophobia and so on. So we're sort of trying to work in all of those different quarters, and we're a very small group, but we're doing the best that we can in that regard. In terms of the building the movement, the other thing that I would I think it is just, I'm always looking for the magic sort of formula too, I guess we all are, so how do we do this and what's the next best step? And I think it is just, we just need to keep at it, but we need to be consciously broadening the movement, as people have said. So Sam talked about, we have got the Uniting Church who spoke for the first time in 2 years at a meeting on Friday, at our rally on Friday night. We've got Amnesty just poised to speak for the first time in 2 years at a rally. We've organised a pride float, Queers for Palestine, for the first time, that will be happening at the end of this year. So we've got, it is just that sort of outreach, constant outreach, and constant, as well as mobilising. I think, that idea of needing to meet people where they're at too, and finding the different ways and forms of reaching out and engaging with people is crucial. And it's hard because we're all running around like blue-ass flies and we're so busy we can barely breathe. But so finding more avenues is, we need to broaden the organisers and give more people the skills to do some of that broadening work as well. And I'd be interested to talk to Mick about more of the trade union stuff, because I think it's true that The unions also won't take that step because they've got a lot of people in their unions. I know in my union who are Zionists who will absolutely lambaste them. And I've tried getting motions through my own union, and I know there's a Zionist on council who tried to get the IHRA definition adopted by the union and failed because we waged a campaign against that. But so, you know, there is that fear of being branded as anti-Semitic. I think that's still quite significant in some of those unions. I don't say that's all that's going on. It is the allegiance to the Labor Party, and it is a lack of understanding, and it is that the unions haven't been geared towards social movements for a long time, actually. So we're needing to sort of bring them back into that kind of arena of struggle, I suppose. But yeah, I'll leave it there, I think.
Well, big round of applause to all three, and hopefully Adam's still on. I think it's a really important, incredibly important contribution and discussion on how to act on the key moral question of the day, which is how to free Palestine. And there are ongoing rallies, of course, in the major capital cities, but we've come out of a National Day of Action where we got 200,000 people out on the street. So the small cities and the small towns are just as equally important to keep organising around. And there's September 13 is a National Day of Action against the far right, who are calling Palestinian flags terrorist flags. So the Palestine Solidarity Movement is in various forms assisting the First Nations communities in organising those rallies, so get along to them. And I think it's really imperative to take Adam's contribution on board in our thinking and our discussion about both building the movement but also building the eco-socialist left. Because as Zionism is a battering ram against the movement for decolonisation and the socialist movement, we also have to be a battering ram against Zionism and capitalism. So thanks very much. Do we want a bit of a photo shoot if Adam's still there? And fists in the air for fears raised. Does anyone have a water?